Good afternoon and welcome to this live talk show where we're going to be having a conversation about rolling back the teenage pregnancy crisis within the country. I am Rita Kanya and I'll be your moderator this afternoon. Now, as a country, we continue to fight against the COVID-19 pandemic, but this afternoon in this live talk show, we shift our attention to another issue, that's the teenage pregnancy crisis within the country. Now, in July, Daily Monitor did report that there had been over 2,300 schoolgirls that had conceived during the lockdown. Now, these are just from reports that have actually been documented in different areas, but the numbers could even be higher. Now, in our conversation, we also take a look at what will be happening tomorrow. Now, tomorrow the world will be commemorating the World Contraception Day, which is annually commemorated on the 26th of September, and that is tomorrow, as I had mentioned earlier. This day was first commemorated in 2007, and when it was initiated by the 10 international family planning organizations. Now, the activities on this day are aimed at increasing awareness about contraception, especially the problems arising due to the neglecting of the use of contraception, especially among young girls and young women, boys and men of reproductive age. Now, when we talk about contraception, it's also a part of the sexual and reproductive health and rights services, and in the country, these are accessed by a particular group of people based on their age and also what our laws and social norms are. Now, our conversation this afternoon, as we take a look at rolling back the teenage pregnancy crisis in Uganda, I am joined by a group of panelists. Now, we have Dr. Dina Nachiganda, who is the Commissioner for Adolescent and School Health at the Ministry of Health. We're also joined by Mr. Stepbystep, who is the Monitoring and Evaluation Manager at the Center with Naguru, that is the Naguru Teenage Information and Health Center, and Rose Wachikona, who is the Senior Program Officer at the Center for Health, Human Rights and Development, that is CEHAD. All of you, welcome to NTV. Good afternoon. Now, we'll start with you, Sebi. Just giving us, you have had just a bit of statistics that were put in the Daily Monitor about the number of girls who have conceived during the lockdown. But as a center, you you give information to the youth, but also you get to talk to them on a daily basis. What has it been like during this time?
Thank you very much, and I want to thank the viewers. What has it been like at Naguru? First, I want to say that Naguru Teenage Information and Health Center is a program, an adolescent health program for young people. What Naguru does is provision of healthcare services and, of course, provision of information and, of course, sensitizing young people and the general community about sexual reproductive health and rights issues. What it has been like at Naguru, at the time of the lockdown, there was a crisis that everyone knows. During this time, the numbers of young people arriving at the facility went down, of course, because of restriction on movement for both the young people who needed services and the care providers. Now that things seem to be normalizing, we are getting back to full implementation. Service delivery, other program activities are back to shape, and we are beginning to see the numbers of young people increase again. Before the lockdown, we would receive between 80 to 140, 120 young people daily at the facility. That gives us a total of about 2,500, 2,700 in a month. And the lockdown affected that, and right now we are getting back to around 70, 80 to 90 young people every day at the facility, still taking us to about 1,700, 1,500 young people in a month. In terms of access to information, Naguru provides information on contraceptives and, of course, providing services on contraceptives and sexual reproductive health generally. And the use of contraceptives right now, we would say that the numbers are again increasing. What happened is that during the lockdown crisis, quite a number of young people missed out their contraceptives because of that restriction and, of course, partial closure. What happens right now is that this number is beginning to come back. Today, we see about 60 young girls. Last month, for example, we saw about 60 young girls came for family planning, different methods of family planning, contraceptives to say. And it is an indication that this number is getting back, is rising again. But what is important to note is that among these people who are getting contraceptives, there are some very, very young people also, very,
when you
very
say
young girls.
Could you give us an
Say,
age?
for
Is it
example,
12?
in the range of about 12 to 14 years, who are asking for contraceptives.
And as a center, do you have perhaps a rule of who can actually be able to access these contraceptives and who cannot?
Yes, Naguru Teenage Center works within the laws of Uganda. And in Uganda, you know that contraceptives are provided, recommended for people of 18 years plus, people of age, I would say. So because of that, we have some challenges dealing with very young adolescent girls, like 14 years, 15 years, 16 years, who are asking for these contraceptives. Except for very, very special cases. You find a young girl, 15 years old, and has had a pregnancy already, has had a baby, and is interested in a contraceptive method, wants to not conceive again. So those special cases, and I think it is provided for in the law that these are categorized as emancipated adolescents or young people. They are treated as special cases, and we provide contraceptives to them.
So what about those who come and want it between 12 and 14? You can't provide because maybe they are not within that particular other age group and bracket. What happens to those?
The challenge right now is the law. We are restricted by the requirements of the law, and the best we can do is to provide additional information and counseling for this very special group, 14 years, 12 years old. But we try as much as possible to avoid providing contraceptives to contravene what the health ministry provides for. So that stands as one of the big challenges that we have as a facility, but also for the country generally. Those are some of the things that really we see that affect provision, access, delivery of contraceptives to young people.
Okay. Well, Dr. Dina, just to bring you in from the Ministry of Health, when he mentions, as a center we have children as young as 12 coming in asking for contraceptive. As the Ministry of Health, do you also have data showing that yes, there is this age group that is coming in, also trying in different parts of the country to access contraceptives?
Thank you very much, our viewers, and good afternoon. So I just want to say that recognized reproductive age bracket is between 15 and 49 years of age. So even for our recurrent data collection that we have at the ministry, it really lies between this age bracket. So, but we are increasingly hearing people, children giving birth, and this is something we are taking keen interest on to ensure that we kind of categorize and have an update on the routine data that we collect for children as young as below 15 years. Because we know for UBOS and the UDHS and the District Health Information Systems, we only were recording from 15 years. But increasingly we are hearing, and also get to health facilities where we have recorded this, but it hasn't been routinely coming out. So it's something we are taking keen interest on as ministry, and we hope that we can start to capture this routinely.
Okay. But in the meantime, when you mention that there's counseling that is given to these children at this point in time, what does the ministry cater for that particular age group? Because as we wait for the data to come through, what is being catered for?
All the health workers in our health facilities are trained on adolescent and youth-friendly services. And this training means that you have to have knowledge on the details and what kind of services you're giving to the different age brackets. A lot of age-appropriate information is still being given to these children, and we are now working on transformative agendas to ensure that these children kind of transform within themselves. We talk to them about abstinence and keeping in school as long as they can. But like he said, sometimes they come in pregnant, and we know that still in the law, we don't do abortions are not, safe abortions are also not acceptable in the law. So these children will be encouraged to keep their babies up to birth. And then again, constant counseling given to them to get back to school and to continue with their careers.
Well, Rose, bringing you into the conversation, from what you hear from both Sebi and Dr. Dina, what are your remarks on this?
For me, as an organization, we think that there is a contradiction. There is a huge contradiction between what the statistics are giving us and what sort of health services are being offered, especially for adolescents. You'll find that most adolescents are being repressed, they are being exploited sexually. So they do not have the ability to negotiate sex, they do not have the ability to have safe sex because the services are not being offered to them. We have the National School Health Policy, which has taken over 10 years on the shelves of the Ministry of Health that up to now still hasn't yet been passed. And this policy is supposed to guide schools on how to offer services to adolescents who are going to school. So when some of these policies that are supposed to guide in the giving of care to students or to adolescents or even to those who are out of school are not being implemented, then it becomes a challenge, because then adolescents cannot be able to access services that they need in order to have safe sex. So there is a big contradiction between the health services and what actually the adolescents are doing, because the average age of sexual debut within Uganda is 14 years of age. People as young as 14 are having sex, but you cannot say that such people cannot access contraceptives, that they cannot access services of delivery. There is a time when someone came and said that midwives who offer delivery services to children who are below the age of 18, they are going to be arrested if they don't report it to police. So you make health workers pull away from giving the timely interventions that they need to be able to do. So I think we need to do a cohesion. We need to have a reality check as a country and come to the conclusion that yes, adolescents are having sex and they need health services.
Okay. 2 comments here.
Yes, Doctor.
Thank you, my colleague on the panel. 2 comments. The school health policy is not seated in the Ministry of Health. It's seated in the Ministry of Education, just for clarity, but just to say that we work closely with them on the policy to ensure that what health should give is really in the policy. That's 1. And then 2, when the young children come to hospital pregnant, the health worker has sworn an oath and they will take care of this health, this young baby. I think this gentleman here has spoken to it. And everywhere in the country, 10 years, 15 years. I gave an experience of one time a child came to hospital 13 years and they didn't know they were in labor. So we had to take care of this child, counsel the parents that this child is actually having contractions to give a baby. So the health workers will deliver the baby, even if the child is 12 years. So of course, different people have, I could have my personal opinion, but the national standard is different. So when these children come, the health workers are trained to deliver them, to actually look at them as a special category. And that is in regards to the actual service delivery when they come to deliver. The issue is around the contraception. And I want to say that Ministry of Health has done various researches with, for example, Makerere School of Public Health, with PMA, Performance Monitoring and Evaluation. We have various statistics, yes. And we, as the ministry, we know that, yes, there's all this data to show this. But also to give a comment that when policies are being passed, for example, and many times we ask why is it that this policy has, for example, taken for this long? The thing is, policy development is only not a technocrat issue. It's not only about saying this is what the statistics show. Policy development entails everyone in the country. It entails the religious leaders, it entails the cultural leaders, everyone. And as much as our thoughts on particular subjects are different, that is how long the policy will take to pass. So yes, the evidence exists, but then we have to be all accommodating to the thoughts of religious leaders, for example, to the thoughts of the parents of these children, to the thoughts of everyone in the key stakeholders in the country. If we don't do that, then yes, we will say, okay, let's go ahead and do this. But it will get pulled back again because you don't accept that maybe children at that age should have contraception. So I just needed to bring this to the clarity of all our viewers.
Okay, now bring Sebi into the conversation. When you mentioned the fact that at the center you do provide contraception, what kind of contraception do you give to the boys and the girls?
We have a range of contraceptions recommended for this country. And of course, with Minister of Health as providing the guidance for these contraceptives. But to be very specific, for the boys, right now we have the condoms. And unfortunately or fortunately, that is the only available contraceptives for the boys. For the girls, we have different ranges of contraceptives that are available in any facility, from oral pills to injectables to devices, implants that can be put in the body of a woman to prevent the pregnancy. So there is a range of contraceptives, as available in the Ugandan market and as recommended by the ministry. So I would say that Naguru provides all these ranges of contraceptives to young people.
Okay. Well, do most of the times parents know about what their children are getting? When they come to the center, are the parents aware of what's happening? The
problem is that we may not understand completely whether the parents are aware or not. First of all, Naguru is open for parents to escort their children for services. And in some special cases, we also want parental consent to some very specific services. Like if you look at HIV testing, it's been long in this country that some age group cannot have HIV testing without consent of a guardian or a parent. But there are these girls and boys who probably come for contraceptives without their parents, and you don't want to start asking them whether or not their parents know, because that alone is stigmatizing, that alone is discriminating. And we are saying when you're providing services from the rights-based perspective, we are looking at individual choice, and of course we are looking at the respect of this person, and of course we are looking at access to this service when required. I don't know what the law says from the ministry and from my friend Rose, if we must actually ask any young person under the age of 18 whether or not their parents have allowed them to come for contraceptive per se. That would even imply that we should do the same to other services. That would be my thinking.
Okay. Well, why I ask you that question about whether the parents are aware of this is because if this is being done in secret, as we try to say, let's roll back on the pregnancy crisis within the country, bring in Dr. Dinner. Where do we say as health workers, because it has been mentioned in a conversation earlier on this month, which we did have with you about SRHR services within the country, the fact that one, there are very unfriendly services within some of these centers, because these people are also parents who believe as health workers, this particular age bracket should not be having these kind of services availed to them, because mentally as parents, my child will always remain my child. We seem to hide away from the fact that this child could actually be sexually active. So bring in the parent, Dr. Dinner, as maybe for terms and for the sake of consent when it comes to contraception for a child.
Yeah, so he rightly said that there are cases where we really look up to consent, and this has been mainly in the HIV world, but also for the SRHR world, children below 15 years, you would really need parental consent, because you need to understand what is that. And just, sorry, before we get to that, we need to counsel this child and understand what are the surrounding circumstances. So having interacted with this child, you would really get to know what are the special needs for this child. And then in your opinion, as a health worker, you could make a decision that best benefits the child or the patient in front of you. But really for children below 15 years, we would need parental consent. And then for children over 15 years, again, evaluate and look at each case individually, because if a 12-year-old comes to you and they are, for example, street children, who are you going to contact for their consent? So some days we really have to evaluate the kind of client in front of us and make a decision as a health worker.
And a health worker is trained in this particular way?
Yes.
Do you change their mind shift to say, yes, you're a health worker, yes, you might be a parent, but there's this position where sometimes you have to take, and how is it usually like? How is that training?
Yeah, the training really is broad-based, not only for SRHR services. We know that a young person can get various ailments, not only related to contraception. So we train holistically about the whole child, about drugs, about the whole child. So that is what we always talk about, youth friendliness. A health worker to understand this young person as they are, and to understand them in completeness, not only looking at a particular, understand their social background, understand their, are you staying with your parents, all this kind of thing, such that by the time you come to a decision, you really understand this young person as it is. And that is why they are special, and I think increasingly being discussed, because their circumstances are kind of different. Most of them can't consent for themselves like we've just had, but then they go ahead to do things outside what we would call their age bracket. So someone needs to understand their whole client well before a service can be given.
Okay. Well, Rose, bringing in the parent, as we take a look at the parent, do you think that parents within Uganda are willing to have these conversations about contraception with their children? Say a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old, 14, those are below, but also the 15-year-olds.
I think, again, I go back to the contradiction that exists. Because if I'm to give an example of all of us here, the likelihood that we are virgins is very low. But at the same time, if we ask ourselves the question, how many of us sought permission from our parents to have sex? Still, most of us will say, no, I didn't go to my father and tell him, oh, Daddy, I want to have sex. Can you please permit me to do this? So again, it goes back to our children seeking permission from their parents to have sex. They will leave your child in the morning, you'll come back in the evening, probably interact with them for maybe 2 to 3 hours in a day. And you cannot say you know everything that you need to know about it. There are increasing instances of incest between brothers and sisters, siblings. They are coming in and they are presenting with pregnancies, and the owner of the pregnancy is the brother, because parents are leaving them in the house and abandoning them to the care of television. But then again, it goes back to the question of asking, are we asking for permission from our parents to have sex? So if I'm not asking for permission from my parents to have sex, why should I ask for permission from them to obtain a contraceptive? But then again, this comes from a point of privilege, where we are assuming that adolescents are able to walk into a facility and actually request for a contraceptive. I can tell you, in my 30 years of existence, it is a nightmare for me to go to a gynecologist because of the repressed sexuality that we continually talk about. So how do you expect then a teenager or an adolescent to freely walk into a facility and request for a contraceptive? Even walking into a supermarket to buy a condom, for some people it's a nightmare. They'll pass by, throw it in the cart, take it out. Even at the pharmacy, they'll make a line, then tell another person, take over, because they do not want to purchase these commodities. So I think we need to normalize the conversation about contraceptives. We need to educate adolescents and tell them that if you need contraceptives, then it is okay for you to seek for the services. It is okay for you to walk to a pharmacy or to a healthcare facility and normalize these conversations. But if we think that just because we've trained the health workers, but we haven't trained the adolescents that they can access these commodities, then still the linkage and the gap is not going to be covered.
But then one would question, isn't there a danger in that? If we normalize a conversation like that for a society that we are, a country that we are we not giving into fornication and promiscuity for the younger generation?
Again, that is a misconception that most people have. Because when you're talking about sexual liberation, it's not about being liberated to have sex with everyone, that, oh, I'm going to lie in front of this television and start having sex for the whole world to see me. No, it's about knowing your body, knowing how your body works, knowing your values and where your values are going to take you, having information, and then being able to make a choice. But some people are walking around, they do not know what's between their legs. They can't name the parts. They don't know what is circumcised, what is uncircumcised, in order not to be vulgar on television. But you're just walking around with body parts that you do not know how they operate or how they work. How can such a person be able to make a decision? How can they know that if I have sex once, I am going to get pregnant? So that is what we mean by normalizing the conversation. It's about teaching people about their bodies, how their bodies work. But at the same time, this goes hand in hand with the value system, which needs to be entrenched within either culture or religion, so that a person can be able to make decisions that are good for them. But if we say we are not going to talk about our bodies, we are not going to talk about contraception with teenagers, then they are going to use Omo, they are going to take Coca-Cola and think that they are using a contraception, which is a myth.
I really think
yes,
it
Dr.
comes
Dina?
from the information bit. I think you really spoke very well about the information and the age-appropriate information. And before we get to contraceptives, I think there has to have been this detailed discussion on age-appropriate information, such that by the time it gets to contraception, you've talked about how to abstain, and the very good discussion you've had around body parts, what happens if you do this, and what do you get there. But if someone has been into this discussion on information, you might never need to get a contraceptive method at the, you know. So I think it's really about engaging the children with age-appropriate information first.
When you talk about the conversation, just bringing in a peer educator here in the country, we have Kwasoga Winfred joining us via Zoom. And Winfred, we would like you to tell us, what kind of conversations do you have with the youth? As Rose has rightly said, there's a stage-by-stage conversation before you get to contraception. So what is it like when you're engaging with the youth?
Thank you so much, but I beg your pardon because I'm not getting you clearly.
I'm trying to ask you, what kind of conversations do you have with the youth as a peer educator, the young people, when it comes to sexual reproductive health and rights?
Okay, basically most of the young people, most of them don't know their rights. For example, sexual rights, most of them don't know their rights. And usually when I sit with them, we usually discuss about their different rights and their responsibilities, because most of them, only if you find some of them, they know their rights, but they don't know their responsibility. So they're ever emphasizing on their rights, but not knowing the different responsibilities they're meant to take. So basically that.
When you break it down into responsibilities and rights, what are their responsibilities before they get to their rights?
Okay. Most of them are sexually active, I can say, but then they are willing to go and have sex, but they don't know that after having sex, there is a responsibility. Either if someone gets pregnant, you're going to start a family and you need to take care of the kids, and yet they are not ready for that. So it is their responsibility to learn if they are ready to have sex and get those kids, if they are ready to take care of the kids, and also manage a family as a young person. Basically that.
Well, thank you so much, Winfred. Bringing back the conversation into studio, Sebi, when Rose mentions and also Dr. Dina mentions the fact that, you know, there's a step-by-step conversation that needs to happen. How does it happen within the center?
Yeah, first I want to start from the point where Rose stopped, and the fact that people misconceive so much about the issue of opening up contraception space for young people, and thinking that this assumingly will increase sexual activity, including what you call, there's a word you used, fornication.
Yes.
But I think that is not right. Why? Because if we want to talk about evidence-based intervention, no one has provided us evidence anywhere that when contraception space is opened, fornication or these sort of activities will increase.
So it's a myth.
It's a myth, completely. And someone must bother to first of all bring that sort of evidence, a lesson that has been documented from somewhere, within this community or outside this community, to show us that actually what you're asking for is going to lead us to this direction, and probably let us take it slowly. I would think that the conversation has to be normalized. And at the facility, yes, the peer educator, the young girl, talked about the rights and responsibilities. That's one of the things that at our facility, the counselors and peer educators emphasize that, look here, young girl, young boy, you want to have sex, or you have a feeling of friendship, and that might advance into sexual intercourse or sexual activity. But remember, as you go for that sex, you have a responsibility to negotiate for the safe sex. You also have a responsibility, you as the young man, to protect this girl and have this sex safe, so that, you know, the both of them understand that, yes, we have a feeling, we have a body that probably it's natural that we are going to end up in having sex, but we have a responsibility on that. It's a right that we must enjoy the sex and sexual engagement and all that, appreciate love and all that. But as you go into it, my responsibility is that I negotiate it safe. I should have the condom, and if in any case I am not going to use the condom, I am sure of both our HIV status, and I think I'm sure of my safe days, then I should think about what the consequence will look like. If I get pregnant today, what happens? Am I ready to have this pregnancy? So that is the level of conversation that we want to have with the young people, both at the facility and in different communities, in mass movement gatherings. When we talk to young people and we are discussing sexuality and sex and contraceptive use, sexual reproductive health generally, those are the things that we touch. And for me, and I want to believe Rose here and Doctor here, that is how we normalize the conversation. What the missing gap is from the parents, from the lawmakers, from the religious leaders. We want to bring all these categories of stakeholders into the conversation to appreciate completely and to appreciate with the reliable evidence that actually what we are talking about is to bring good to this young, to change. If we want to roll back teenage pregnancy, this sort of conversation must be popularized and must be popularized with all stakeholders at the same level.
Okay. Well, Dr. Dina, representing one of the stakeholders, the Ministry of Health, which stakeholders are you bringing on board to have these conversations?
Okay, thank you. We are engaging a lot of stakeholders in this conversation. Key to these are the Ministry of Education and Sports, because we are seeing children in school and also out of school, but also in the higher institutions. And also the Ministry of Gender, because of the increasing cases of incest and rape and all these engagements at the community levels. We are engaging the media. We are working with various partners, finance, but also the religious leaders. We work actively with CSOs that are engaging the religious leaders and cultural leaders. I know we've had various engagements with the Nabagereka, the Uganda government, the Busoga government. So we are trying to bring on everyone. Of course, the parents link has been a bit minimal, but because of the gender link that we are working with and the guidance that gender has given, we try to work together with them. So we are bringing in almost everyone that we can work with to ensure that the teenage pregnancy levels come down.
And how are those
but
interactions
key
like?
To them is the National Population Council. We always forget to talk about it, but because also it relates into a population pressure on the country, we are also working closely with National Population Council to coordinate us in all this movement.
Are there any bumps along the road in that
Yes.
conversation? Where the bumps that you see every time maybe you're having a conversation with a key stakeholder, this is where the conversation stops, and why?
Certainly there are major bumps, and I think we've discussed these a few times. I'll give the example of the sexuality framework, which all of us have a knowledge about. The wording alone could mean something different to a few stakeholders, and yes, this happens all the time. But also with the parents, me being a parent and probably some of you, some parents are really timid, they don't have the information. So when you get to say normalize contraception, oh, everyone would be like, my 10-year-old, my 14-year-old. Naturally, as a parent, I think we still want to have this owning of our babies, so you expect these kind of challenges. But bigger bumps are in the system itself, because we know that, for example, in the schools, you could only give information and not more than that. Though we know that some schools have as old as 18-year-olds, but because of the policy, because of the guidance there, you can't give a commodity. So you keep wondering, so if there is this 18-year-old who is of age, what happens to them if they can't get commodities in a school? So there are all these challenges, but I think the discussion continues until we all come to the same page of agreement and have the same thoughts around the children in this country.
Okay. You mentioned the gender bit when it comes to parents, and also it takes me back to the conversation of who should be having this conversation in the family setting. And Rose, you have mentioned, let's normalize it. But then who? Because you'll have maybe the mother saying, I can only speak to the girl, and if maybe she's a single mother and she has a son, then that conversation never happens. So things like that, that conversation in the family setting, starting from your grassroots. How can a mother have a conversation with a son, and how can a father have a conversation with the daughter about this?
I think parents should know that men and women are biologically different. And if you do not expose your daughter to the male biology, then they are not going to know what it's like. Equally, if you don't expose as a mother your son to the female biology, then they are not going to understand it. I'll give an example of maybe sending let me just give telling your father, hey, Daddy, please bring for me some pads from the supermarket. Are you open to buying for your daughter pads? It starts from that level. When your daughter comes to you telling you, oh, my chest seems to be having lumps within it, and they've chosen you over their mother. Are you going to say, go to your mother to tell you, or are you going to sit them down and have this conversation? We need to begin breaking the barriers that gendering of the society has brought to us. Men can talk about women's issues. Women can talk about men's issues. That is why menstrual hygiene has become such a problem in this country, because you'll find that men are not participating in the conversation. Every time they see a woman suffering under the burden of menstruation, they are going to either draw back or they are going to make snide remarks, but they do not participate positively. So we need to take away that barrier of saying that women talk to women, men talk to women. They should be able to both talk to their children so that they can have a balanced view of the world. That's why we have so much education for the girl child in terms of the sengas, bridal showers, in preparation for marriage. But when you come to the kojas, very little is done to men. So they come with all these expectations, but with very little that they are putting on the table. And the woman will have, oh, I have all these styles I've learned, I have all these things that I can do. But the man, he knows only one style and only one way of doing things, and to sit down and wait for food on the table. So we need to break those barriers. If there are spaces being created for sexuality education, let those spaces be acceptable for both men and women, and let them have a balanced conversation so that everyone knows what their expectations are. And this is even reflected in the fact that we have only one contraceptive for males, but several for women. When they tried to make a pill for men, the men went up in arms and said, how dare you try to kill our children, our sperms. Yet, women have fewer eggs than men do. Men have millions of sperms just within one droplet of a sperm. They have millions of sperms that are running around. But women produce almost 1 to 2 eggs per month. So who is better off taking on the burden of contraception? So again, research needs to be put into some of those areas so that we take out the issues of gender roles within the conversation of contraception.
Okay. Well, as we roll back on the number of cases when it comes to teenage pregnancy within the country, we bring in Winfred once again, who's joining us via Zoom. Winfred, as a peer educator, who do you find yourself interacting mostly with, and who is more willing to speak about the challenges they have? Is it the boys or the girls, and why?
Who is doing what?
Who do you find is more willing to have these conversations? Is it the girls or the boys who come up to you, or who you find easier to speak to when it comes to what their responsibilities are and their rights?
Okay, according to me and according to my facility, there is a safe space for both girls and boys. So basically it depends on who comes, but all of them usually turn up because they all need services. And most of them usually ask me, the boys most especially, why are you only supporting girls and you're leaving the boys out? So they really need the male engagement also. Basically, at my facility, they all turn up and we share the different information, and we also support them equally as the girls. Because I know most times a boy might turn up and is ready to speak to a female peer educator to address the different issues. And also a girl may turn up but is ready to speak to a male peer educator for support. So most times it depends, and our facility is ready to support all the different girls and boys in order to benefit from the SRHR services.
Now, Dr. Dina, just to bring in where we currently stand as a country, the numbers do not seem to be going down. They're only going higher with the COVID-19 pandemic. But what is the Ministry of Health doing now to deal with these numbers?
Okay.
What is the strategy?
Yeah. So various strategies have been put up by the Ministry of Health to bring down the teenage pregnancy rates. And of course, working with various stakeholders. We've always said teenage pregnancy is a role of every one of us, the parents, the teachers, everyone. And the Ministry of Health probably has just a little bit of the elephant to bite. But we've given a lot of guidance, especially around COVID, and we've shared this different guidance, especially to ensure that continuity of services goes on despite whatever is happening. Information and services to adolescents should be prioritized even when there is a lot of COVID work going on. But that said, we are also ensuring that we are working with the grassroots health workers to ensure that adolescents are reached in wherever they are coming from. Of course, peer educators, we are working with partners to ensure that they continuously reach their young people, and also our normal village health team structure that the government has given. And most importantly, government has ensured there is a method mix. My brother here spoke about it very well, so that if I come to a facility, every commodity that I should choose on, I can be able to get this. And this is very keen regarding to bringing the teenage pregnancy rate down, because if I come and I want a condom and it's not there, then I probably will get pregnant that night if I didn't have a condom. So government is working very hard to increase financing to commodities around contraception, but also to ensure that there is a broad base of commodities for everyone to access at any one time. We are working with education and information for those in school, but also with gender for information for those out of school, and increasingly working with cultural leaders to contextualize the whole discussion around teenage pregnancy and how to bring this down. The religious leaders too have a big role to play, and now that the churches are slowly getting opened, maybe they can now start to engage actively with adolescents and young people as a routine, because we see there is a lot of need to ensure that the young people still can get reached by these kinds of people. Yeah, so majorly that is what we have done, and yeah, we continue to ensure that services and information still goes down to the last of the young people that we will need to see.
Okay, well, as the Naguru Center, Sebi, what activities have you now put in place perhaps as a center to see how do we go back, how do we bring these numbers down? Because I believe as a center there's something you can do.
Yes, at the center, first of all, I want to tell you and tell the whole world viewing that we have gone back to full services. We are doing everything that we have been doing before for the past about 3 decades. And when I talk about full services, we are talking about providing information to boys and girls, to young people, on sexual reproductive health services generally, but of course information for preventive measures, information around abstinence, information around contraceptive use, for example, and of course doing all the relevant and the necessary tests when you find your body behaving or appearing in a way that you don't understand. For young people, they just find their body behaving or appearing in a way they don't understand. Many of them actually get pregnant not realizing that they are pregnant. They have never experienced menstruation, for example. They are playing around with their peer age mates, and they end up getting pregnant. They come to a facility when she's 2 months pregnant, 3 months pregnant, she's not aware. So we ask them and provide information to them to monitor this sort of changes in their bodies. And of course, if they realize anything, they should visit the facility to do these checkups. However, when it comes to what we are doing right now in the crisis of the COVID, and of course, would think that COVID is slowly relaxing, we have intensified our community engagement with young people and parents. We do a lot of work in the community. We have community dialogues, we have conversation through the television, through the radios. We are engaging with the young people through what we call the mass movement fora. We bring together young people from different regions in this country, in different places, to talk about sexuality, sexual reproductive health, and talk about all these issues, including the teenage pregnancies. We have very young people, like you saw the peer educator, well-trained young people, peer educators, who are able to work with their peers in different environment and setting. So we make use of these young people to really engage with their peers through football, through games like football. We have got a facility at the center that brings The young people in that age group, we call it the teen club. The young people meet there every Saturday. Up to about 100, 150 young people meet there every Saturday to talk about sexuality, sexual reproductive health, talk about generally adolescent health and development. So those are some of the strategies. But also not to forget that we are engaging so much with the young people through the electronic media, the WhatsApp groups, the Facebook conversations, online conversations of different sorts. So I think we have learned to trick the COVID crisis the way it also came to us abruptly.
Okay, well, when you mentioned the number of teens that come over on Saturday, I hope they're observing the SOPs, but also what is, we'll just bring in Rose to have your last remarks on this. What do you think should be now the direction to see us roll back the teenage pregnancy crisis in our country?
Yeah, I think what we need to do is to prioritize some of these policies that have really delayed, like the National Sexuality Education Framework, the school health policy. These policies really need to be operationalized and rolled out so that teenagers, adolescents can also benefit from some of them. But also I think we need to decentralize youth-friendly services, because now, for example, in Kampala, we'll find Naguru Teenage Health Center, but in other parts of Kampala, it may be a little bit difficult for youth to access youth-friendly services. So it needs to be taken down to the district level so that people can be able to benefit it. But we also need to normalize the conversation on sexuality. We should stop hiding our heads in the sand and pretending that our young people are not having sex, because they actually are. So how can we support them? How can we help them? If the mantra or the message of abstinence is refusing to work, what more can be done to escort that message so that our children are not getting pregnant at 14 and then being kicked out of schools? And you know, for me, it just pains me so much, because the most adversely affected by all this, the person who is most affected by sexual reproductive health violations are girls. So you'll find that girls have worse indicators than boys do. So we need to do a lot in terms of empowering even the youth, because how can you not know that I am having sex, I'm going to get pregnant? It means that you do not know your body, you do not know your body parts and how they operate. We need to do a lot of sensitization. Yeah, and we've made very many commitments even as a country. The 2020 commitments on family planning. These are things that need to be operationalized within the country. And we really need to give access to contraceptives for our adolescents for as long as they are sexually active, irrelevant or irrespective of their age, so that they can be able to make informed decisions about their bodies.
Okay. Well, you make mention of the commitments that Uganda has actually committed to. And Dr. Dina, as we finish this up, just to bring you in and tell us how far Uganda's performance is when it comes to the family planning commitments and the 2020 targets.
Okay, thank you very much. Uganda is part of the global movement for the FP 2020. And in these, different countries sign up to targets that countries should meet. And Uganda signed up to having a modern contraceptive rate of 50% by 2020. And after where we are now, this is 2020, we are at 39, almost 40%. And just to say that there's been significant increase. And I think all of us know that at that time, the modeling that was done probably was quite optimistic, if I should say. And we've had a few points increase in that MCPR. So for a country, even if the initial targets were at 50%, and now we're at 39, we see that the point increase for the country has been significant. So that's for the modern contraceptive rate. And this means medical sterilization of, medical procedures to prevent a woman from becoming pregnant, a woman or a man. So that is where we are. But also there is a key indicator on the unmet need for family planning, and we thought that by 2020 it would be up to 10%, but we haven't hit this also. And of course from this discussion we've seen how and why, because generally speaking the population of young people is big in this country, and we've seen that there are various barriers, one or two here and there, that really affect them from accessing this. So as long as we don't address a few issues, the policy, the various issues around how to the young folk can access this, then the unmet need will still be a little higher than what we expect. Yeah, so that we can get to the targets.
Well, I believe that our conversation has in one way or another informed perhaps what the Ministry of Health will be taking a look at. Well, that was our conversation this afternoon. We were taking a look at how we can roll back the teenage pregnancy crisis in Uganda, and the conversation has taken us from where perhaps we need to start, and that is just the conversation at home before we even get to contraception. Having been joined by Dr. Dina Nachiganda, Commissioner for Adolescent and School Health at the Ministry of Health, and Mr. Sebi Kadokech, the Monitoring and Evaluation Officer, Manager, I beg your pardon, at the Center. That is the Naguru Teenage Information and Health Center. Rose Wachikona, who is a Senior Programmer at the Center for Health, Human Rights and Development, that is CEHAD, and Kasoga Winfred, who is a peer educator, and she joined us via Zoom. Thank you all so much for joining us for this conversation.
Thank you for having us.
Have a good afternoon. Coming up is NTV at 1 with Sandra Tino Video.